This is the 7th of 15 of these seminars. So we're kind of nearly halfway through. And it's, we've got a whole series of additional sort of dangerous ideas in education to explore. But I'm really pleased to see Alan here today, because some of you will know that Alan's been away for a considerable period of time and has had some kind of reconstructive surgery, or destructive surgery you might say, to try and put him back in a healthy position. So I know you're on kind of extreme number of drugs, and he did say to me earlier on, if I start floating about, can you please prod me? Just throw something at him. I probably won't do that, but if you can bear in mind the fact that Alan may have to sit down at some point. The reason is medical and not because he's exhausted. So with that, I'll leave it up to Dr. Owen Barden to say a few words about Alan.
So yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Alan to you. He's an Associate Professor in our Centre for Culture and Disability Studies. Someone who has published extensively on special educational needs and inclusion and disability, both in the area of policy and practice, where he co-wrote the textbook for the first year of our course, and in his research interest around digital technology and media, which I think forms the basis of today's presentation. I've not been here all that long myself, as you know, but I have always been impressed by how generous Alan has always been with his time and his ideas. Unlike me, I think he's a proper intellectual. He's always engaging, exploring, finding new ways, investigating new ways of thinking about often quite difficult ideas. And that means that whenever I've seen him speak at seminars and conferences, he's always been very engaging and always very thought-provoking. And I'm sure it'll be the same today. So, welcome, Alan. Okay.
Hello. Before I begin today, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the faculty and the university for all the messages of support and encouragement while I've been off on an enforced absence. It's so good to be back amongst friends today, so thank you. Okay, to the lecture then. The anti-democratic employment of schools' cyberspace. A pilgrimage into an Arab winter. In this lecture today, I wish to bring critical attention to the manner in which the internet and the intranet are employed as pedagogical space in schools. I also wish to articulate my struggle to understand and so research in this place of electronic communication. Informed by Nietzsche and some biblical scripture, I suggest that what has developed in education is a church of the internet that is worshipped as a shelter of safety for educational learning. The hard kernel of my thesis is that a lack of control of uploaded and downloaded digital media results in spaces which are replete with extant societal prejudices and mirrored bigotry. To evidence my argument, I present data from English schools' colonisation of cyberspace and suggest that in this terra nullius, in this brave new world, a new civilization constructed upon old world ideals has conformed the construction of the disabled indigene. So to begin, a rallying call to join a pilgrimage. This from a declaration of the independence of cyberspace made in Davos, Switzerland, 1996 by John Perry Barlow. Governments of the industrial world, I come from cyberspace, the new home of the mind. I address you with no greater authority than that which liberty itself always speaks. I declare that the global social space we are building to be natural and independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose upon us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere, may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before. During a visit to a local school, a teacher commented to me that they liked the school's internet and intranet as it provided a safe space in which pupils could learn. In this lecture, I wish to put to one side the moral panic which renders the information superhighway as a topos inhabited by predatory paedophiles, one awash with pornography, every fetish known to society, and beast. And that a safe space is overused, but an under-theorized metaphor. As researcher, I entered this space cloaked in a shroud of utopian ideal. This ideal centred on the belief that in this brave new world, disability, social justice and equality might harmoniously coexist. Here, though, was my first error, and this ideal became but epigraph to my naivety. Through immersing myself in the cultures and practices of the World Wide Web, an educational space was revealed that was but mirror to the reflected images of society's bigotries and ableist agendas. This mirror, then, was not a mask of reality, but reflected only the reality of past ages. Exploration of this topos in covers terms did not reflect a separation between life and knowledge. It produced no homological inversions, only inversions of inversions. So my utopian ideal inverted, my journey became constrained and conformed by Cartesian logic. It was this logic which brought me back, crashing to this earth and its old world geographies. This lecture, then, details my examination of the topography of the internet and intranet spaces, and of my struggles to form an understanding of the society constructed in this electronic landscape. Within the paper, I move away from the quantitative and qualitative aspects of specific goods to emplace a new theoretic with which to map out this space of intranet. My central argument, my guiding light for this journey of enlightenment, is that schools' cyberspace as a space of pedagogy had become Latour's black box, where the perceived shelters of equality were so simple, so deeply rooted as to remain unquestioned. By employing biblical scripture, then, counterpointed by the writings of Nietzsche, I contend that these shelters of equality were built with walls of impalpable shadows, stabilised on bedrocks of educational rhetoric. As such, then, these shelters provided nothing but illusions of protection for equality, social justice, and inclusive educational practice. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Al Gore, Vice President of the United States in 1995, said of the Internet, "From these connections we will derive robust and sustainable economic progress, strong democracy, better solutions to global and local environmental challenges, improved healthcare, ultimately a greater sense of the shared stewardship of our small planet. In a sense, the global information infrastructure will be a metaphor for democracy itself." According to Thornton, every emergent communicative medium has been revered, and the fervour of its disciples have brought forth homiletics grounded in the belief that this technology, unlike the unrealised hopes of the one before, will materialise positive social change on a scale not seen for hundreds and thousands of years before. For example, in the early 20th century, radio was instilled with the hope that it would produce a utopian democracy. Within this glamorous fog, the German psychologist and social theorist Arnhem in 1936 claimed that the democratising power of the radio was so complete that it will make class distinctions irrelevant and the concept of class as anachronistic. The intellectuals and the journalists of the 1950s continued this deification, worshipping radio as the greatest educational medium of the modern age, one which would bring forth universal and equal educational opportunities for all. Like radio before, television of the 1950s and 60s homiletic was that it was the silver bullet, the magic technological fix for all of society's democratic and social problems. As sermon details, television was the medium that would improve education, it would prevent crime, prevent urban decay, break down social isolation, help people to communicate, and enhance social democracy. Here then is the Internet's Bible, Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1, the rehearsed script, which paints in the present a motif of Al Gore as the high priest of the democratizing influence of the Church of the Internet. Within this ideology and enforced teleology, it seems only in Nietzsche's words that submission to the priest alone would redeem. However, Whilst it may be argued that radio was employed in Algeria in the middle of the 20th century as catalyst to democratic and social change, in general, the techno-fix of these medias has not been realised. Norton points out that the history of descriptive technologies is often one of a struggle between technological innovation and societal control. Indeed, Reingold highlights that every emergent communicative technology brings a shadow potential as democracy becomes suppressed by power plays, as compelling forces and competing forces fight for influence and control over the communication flow. Such power plays ensured that the rehearsed script of democracy delivered by what Nietzsche might call the parasitical priest becomes but rhetoric. The promise of utopian miracles obfuscates any real understanding of the emergent medium in society and ultimately, I argue, nullifies its potential for social change. This then is ideology. It is where the internet becomes a telescreen that George Orwell envisaged. It's seen to pose a threat to democracy through the ways in which government uses it to manipulate users. Lamentations 2:11-14. Your prophets have said so many foolish things, false to the core. Instead, they painted false pictures, filling you with false hope. Juxtaposition of Nietzsche's writing here renders this rehearsed script as homiletic and one of the most corrupt conceptions of the divine ever attained on this earth. It represents to me the low watermark in this divine thing's development. This God then is contradiction. It is a deity of nothingness, the will to do nothingness pronounced holy. In this new hyperworld then, topography is dominated by a creationist techno-prophecy, which acting as antonym to old world end of days prophecies has likewise not been realised. Like the apocalyptic zealots each day translate, read here, technology, brings forth nothing but disappointment. Thus, solution to their lack of realisation of the prophecy is that the priests simply pray harder, realign dates, adjust slightly their homiletic and pray that the next big thing brings redemption and perhaps even salvation. The end of the old world then is nigh. A new digital world of third wave democracy will arrive, but perhaps in a tomorrow that never comes. As Stronach might say, like much in the postmodern, it is only what it will have been. Let us, though, begin this pilgrimage into this hyperworld and its place of shadows, to the internet itself. Recent internet statistics reveal a very large number, which I'm not going to read out, users worldwide. For many, large chunks of our time are spent gazing at the depthless surface of the computer monitor as windows to our exploration of the topology of cyberspace. This public sphere, a new celebrated space, has invaded and transformed Western culture in its entirety, creating new geopolitical boundaries. Cyberspace is, in Platonic terms, an everlasting space of emplacement, a created techno-utopian ideal, where a seemingly gilt-edged revolution of informationalization, obfuscated by a glamorous fog, is disturbing and encroaching on the traditional modalities of information exchange located in our schools. The internet itself, though, evolved in 1983 from a quiet metamorphosis of a military communication project funded by the United States Department of Defense. Although the internet is perceived as a computer network, in reality, no single monolithic structure prevails. Rather, a matrix of ecosystems of subcultures enmeshed to form a global computer-to-computer network operating using such language as the Transmission Control Protocol, TCP/IP. Born then out of the belly of the Cold War nuclear threat, this earliest virtual village of but a few hundred people has transmuted itself into a state where within Western society it dominates many spheres of daily life. Cyberspace then, with its, as Al Gore would say, highways of the mind, is credited with the potentiality to revolutionize participatory democracy and contribute to various sociological phenomena, not least education, that in due course will positively transmogrify the public sphere. I want now to look a little bit at this argument about cyber optimists versus cyber pessimists. There can be no doubt then that the internet and its technologies represent a radical transformation of the communication environment, both at societal level generally and specifically within the educational environment. For cyber optimists like Gore and Barlow, who I mentioned earlier, and many Western policymakers, the internet has taken on a mythical power which is bound up in quasi-religious belief of positivity. Within cyberspace, then, it appears almost supernatural things are possible, as the internet becomes the panacea, the techno-fix for all of societal ills. Furthermore, the holy people worshipping at the feet of this deity with, as Nietzsche might say, awe-inspiring consistency, vehemently believe that in this new digital age, new democratic forms will be unleashed, which will act as force multipliers for democratic movements. Evidentially, such movements are to be observed all around us. For example, claims are made that the Arab Spring, through the internet and social networks, have been conclusively established as tools for protest, campaigning and circulating information, and as vehicles for freedom. For others, an impressive body of scholarship details how the digital age has reinvigorated civil society by enabling previously marginalised voices to engage. Within this public sphere, cyberspace is, we are told, producing a utopian electronic agora, an Athens without slaves, and that in Gore's term it is an Athenian age of democracy is upon us and within us. Here then, the digital topography has built at its nucleus a church of the internet, where pilgrims and missionary zealots flock to offer praise within its networked aisles. If they are correct, then we should believe that within this church, Thomas Jefferson's aims are finally to be realised. Here within this ecclesia lies a new Holy Trinity, a tripartite soul of personal liberty, diversity and community, which becomes the altar of worship to a new society based upon a commitment to pluralism. Acts 17:23. I found also an altar on which was inscribed, "To the unknown God, who therefore ye reverence, not knowing him, I announce you." Hallelujah, brothers and sisters. We are all to be saved. However, if cyberspace is a metaphor of democracy and agent provocateur of radical change, why then an Arab Spring in Libya and not, say, in Syria, Tibet or Bahrain? In reality, many of these countries are experiencing the chill of a winter, not the blossoming rays of its springtime. To work allegorically with the words of Nietzsche, is the God of the internet dead? Will he, she, its democratizing religion remain dead? And who is culpable in this deicide? Pilgrims. We must be careful with this hyper-reality. Because from the creation of the internet, but more so since its rapid globalization, researchers have questioned the effects of this electronic topology upon political institutions and their machinations. Indeed, practitioners and researchers alike have pondered whether the internet is truly a force for good in the development of a system of democratic ideals. At this point then, I propose we step back from the rhetoric of internet triumphalism and the worship of such graven idols. I want to ask of this God some searching questions, not least whether the Enlightenment ideals of the world liberated from itself stack up to cold, dispassionate scrutiny. Rather than pilgrim, perhaps I'm becoming a skeptic looking for my own redemption. The pilgrimage for now recommences. Let us interrogate this new God of democracy, this telo-democracy. I want to bring forth heresy. I want to define, undermine and refine the tripartite soul. Peter 2, 1-22. But false prophets also arose amongst the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them. I want firstly to challenge the central doctrine that participation positively correlates with increased democracy. Second, I wish to explore the question of participation. Participation into what? Participation by whom? It seems to me that the latter question is where skeptics and pilgrims alike should devote their energies of analysis if we are ever to truly understand this most open, uncensored and unregulated public space in history. Heresy 1. the destruction of the gospel of participation. One of the major claims for the seductiveness of the internet is that the fluidity of organisation and its anarchic structure promote a more egalitarian than elitist, a more decentered than hierarchical spaces. The significance of this interneting technology, we are led to believe, is that the permissive architecture of the global network enables anyone, anywhere, to connect and to take part. This doctrine, it seems, promotes a libertarian ethos and a permissive architecture that enables groups and organisations outside of the conventional power structure to be empowered. Furthermore, it is in the anonymity of access where apparent attributes such as sex and race are masked or even non-existent. This, it is argued, enables free expression and dissemination of view. Truly, pilgrims, it seems, as the New Yorker said in 1993, that within this space, nobody knows that you are a dog. This homiletic, then, is plain, clear and simple. The internet facilitates egalitarian, cooperative and communicative exchange, which breaks down traditional prejudices, social boundaries and inequalities. If we accept this, the church's gospel, its good news message becomes, build it and they will come. Here, then, is the first miracle of this internet church. If access can be granted, participation will follow. Baptized and washed over by the info flow, proselytes, especially those marginalised in the current system, are emancipated and empowered. This gospel of utilitarianism is clear. The bigger you build your church, the more people will participate, and thus democracy is ensured. This gospel message, therefore, seeks to break through the digital divide. Major funding bodies in England and elsewhere have supported research generally and specifically in education, which investigates how all people might be enabled to access interneting technology. We, though, must question this gospel and undermine its good news message. The internet has a much darker side. Rather than creating a new democratic world, I want to try and demonstrate later that the internet and its digital media is colonising electronic space with old world bigoted traditions, values and ideologies. As Nietzsche might say, the deity of decadence, gelded in his most virile virtues and instincts, becomes the necessity of the god of the physiologically retrograde, of the weak. Of course, they do not call themselves the weak. They call themselves the good. This deity of the internet, though, however, pontificates over a doctrine of utilitarian participation shrouded with caveats. For example, it is claimed that the internet makes possible the enhancement of community social relations. Thus, it is argued, potential for emancipatory technology is indeed possible. Here, though, is the first heresy. The doctrine of participation is based upon possibilities and potential. Here again is error. As Moravot's accounts, it is a mistake to treat the internet as a deterministic and one-directional force for global liberation. To Rheingold, the error of this participatory doctrine is it is a potential only possibly achieved. Potential here, though, is formed not upon passive participation, but is malformed upon an active defence of the cause. This notion of defenders of the faith reveals to me metaphors of power and resistance, which illuminate imageries of crusading technologists. These metaphors of power, resistance, defence, crusade invert Habermas's theoretic that the public sphere must be reclaimed if it is to be a source of reasoned consensus formulation. Reclaimed by whom? For whom? Bring forth the Knights Templar, the warrior technologists, to create, claim, reclaim, and reform the topos in a sanctified, beatified war of occupation. However, despite the occupationary forces and in spite of these priests proselytizing, what we face now is video malaise. Within such, an inversion exists between people who interact with digital media and their trusting politicians. Habermas's 2006 research, therefore, invokes to me the deicide of this internet god. This is because he accounts that despite inclusion of ever more citizens, internet users are ambivalent or downright pessimistic about the impact of this medium of communication on democracy. Heresy 2, control of the info flow. Habermas relates that the mass communication is yet another source of power where players on the virtual stage take control by employment of the capital they possess. Here, we may observe Foucault's analytics of modern power, and that one never really stands outside power dynamics. In this internet church, therefore, we may observe that individualization, equality and social justice are forced to compete and participate within totalizing structures of modern power. Here, in Agamben's term, there is to be no state of exception, no exemption from this power. There is only to be the mirrored gaze of a past society, a reflected image of a totalizing power that corrupts totally. Although nascent, I think I'm trying to argue here that Agamben's state of exception is suspended by this state in order to create a utopian, upside-down, right-way up state where the mirror reflects a separation between ontology and narrative. Information within the internet, as with all previous technologies, does not flow in a vacuum, but in a political space that is already occupied. In this participation, obligation, coercion game, a constellation of power relations shrouds who decides what the game is, what it is about, and also who decides who gets in the game. Participation in this topos then is double-edged. You are forced to participate in a game of unequal teams. As Nietzsche might say, the greatest recent event, that God is dead, is that the belief in God has become unbelievable. Cyberspace then is a contested terrain. It is dominated by unequal power distributions. While the doctrine of liberty might have developed a new toolkit, cultural, economic, societal and political factors determines who gets to use it. The myth that participation correlates to democracy is just that. It is a myth. This internet technology might actually increase the divide between the powerful and the powerless. This digital landscape then demonstrates how the internet has become just a new iteration of established practices. For Nietzsche then, this internet world and its democratic credentials would seem intangible. Its participation gospel is imagined science. It is anthropocentric. It is governed by imagined psychology. This world is pure fiction. It falsifies, devalues and negates its own techno-reality. Once this gospel pronounced a correlation between the internet, participation and democracy, there was to be no opposite of this God. Natural tendencies, values and ideology became, as Nietzsche might say, the synonym of reprehensible. This world of democratic fiction was to be grounded on the hatred of the natural of reality. It became the expression of a profound vexation of the sight of reality. John 9:41. If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. Heresy 3. Mirrored images reflected bigotry. I turn now to a short extract from Borges' The Dream Tigers. Mirrors. I see them as an infinite, elemental, executors of an ancient pact, to multiply the world like the act. They prolong this hollow, unstable world. Of every day may include the illusionary, profound globes that reflections scheme. The argument I develop here is that the internet is but mirror to a past society, a mirror which imposes the discipline of institutional justice upon norms and on places. In this glassy essence, the metaphysics of transparency form a unifying dialectic between an internet present and society's past realities, between this God's mind and nature, between subject and object. The mirror inverts the inversion. It reflects into this space only a separation between ontology and narrative. Bigoted stereotypical ideas and ideals in the extant world are reflected and transposed onto electronic topography. In this world, then, there is no unbridgeable gulf between reflection and that which is reflected. There is no irreducible opposition here. Participation in this world is covial to obligation, coercion, and equality. In the creation of this space of shadows, a double bind of fiery illusion and icy reason were folded in on themselves. Explicit became implicit contradiction, as inequalities of past society acted as hinge to this new world. As such, this safe space became an educational playground where coercion and participation morphed to produce a state of being that effectively acted as a method of societal control. This space became, in Cover's terms, jurispathetic. In this place, the subject believes that they are free, but as Latour proclaims, in reality, they are wholly controlled. The mirror then becomes a transparent reflection of the cold computer screen. It is antithetical, inverting focus onto a topography of bigoted, stereotypical inversions, where conditions of knowledge are independent of what empirically exists. Let's, though, try to be positive. The internet is determined by the ingenuity of its users, and its open transfer protocols do promote rapid communication on a global scale. Indeed, in this new space is one where traditional publishing roadblocks such as cost, short text life, can be overcome by employing internet technology. Thus, the possibility and potential is there to enable the voices of marginalised populations to be heard. However, this potentiality only to me further illuminates the perverted reflections of this mirror. It is in the pedagogy of the voice, where a colonising demand and its control of narrative materialises within this digital space. While the high priests of the internet enunciate in democratising voices and promote a space to hear voices of democracy, their gospel completely ignores the social conditions of vast groups of people. For many, the reality of this space of info flows is one which increasingly reflects the hegemony of spaces of places. For Maigret's, the internet is not a new democratic arena, but a place where social problems reinvent themselves in a new space of inequality. For example, Thornton details that men have always been a dominant presence on the internet, and that the internet from its very conception was male territory. Reid concurs, adding that the prevailing hierarchy of this internet community also places race, class and age as subaltern to societal conceptions of normalcy. According to Lesig's framework, social norms regulate the internet space through community-transferred stigma. Hall, Vice-Chancellor at Salford, in an extraordinarily astute and early analysis of the internet, describes such technology as an irrepresentational machine, where monolingualism and homogeneity dominate. He comments, rather than transcending barriers then, the internet culture seems to reinforce them, accentuating the themes of modernism rather than replacing them and reducing heterogeneity. The internet seems to be promoting lifestyle enclaves. Seen in this light, this media age begins to be much like earlier civilizations. I wish now to add to Lesig's framework and so analyse how the construct of disability is malformed within this digital topography. My analysis here centres on the belief that the breaking down of traditional barriers to publishing has led to the strong voice of disabled people being inverted to that of a cultural whisper. I wish also to detail how my naive wanderings in this digital world were shrouded in the priest's internet teachings, and how my imaginings of this world were, in Nietzsche's terms, a pure fiction. For it is in this world of supposed democracy that constructions of disability and disabled people were vastly inferior to my extant world. My ideals of this internet as a space of possibility for social justice and equality were not to be realised. The findings of my research demonstrate that the price of this new space of digital existence was the destruction of nature, and one where power, the internet god, had distinguished the real past world as unholy and one full of sin. To my wanderings then in a mirrored space. Reflection as an entomological embryo designates the mirror's action as that of a reproducing object. In re-entering this electronic space then, I wish now to bend back the mirror's reflected gaze. Let the mirror therefore mirror itself. Let it see itself. In providing specific data from my research into this place of impalpable shadows, I want to reveal this space as one where the concept of being truly appears to itself. Within my research, then, I examined the representation of disability, impairment and disabled people within the electronic media employed within primary schools in England. I was able to collect a wealth of data. In total, I analysed 494 separate electronic resources, which included 4,485 illustrations, 930 photographs, 59 video clips, and hundreds of pages of text. The electronic media contained textbooks, smartboard resources, computer games, teacher-constructed and commercial worksheets, websites, teacher-initiated photographs, and video clips, to name but a few. Despite the depth of data collected, a significant finding was the lack of material relating to disability and impairment. To turn now then, Revelations chapter 1, the mirror's perverting image. My pilgrimage into this digital educational world then was marked, as we said, by a virtual absence of an image of disability. Indeed, my wanderings in this mirrored topography highlighted a pedagogical space where the most prevalent image encountered was that of the white, non-disabled adult male. Here, the mirror's reflected light materialized an agenda of ableism and normalcy. I also found the mirror's glassy essence in text discovered within the school's intranet sites. I wish here to focus upon just such one text. This electronic storybook is worthy of analysis. This is because it illuminates disability as a metaphor of societal inversion of the image of the pirate. The pirate employed in this story represented the baddie in the narrative, an all too familiar construct in Western children's literature. The pirate here was a diminutive figure, rather overweight, and with ruddy cheeks appeared not to be in the best of health. Indeed, a heart attack seemed imminent. He had a lower limb amputation, a prosthetic limb made of wood, a visual impairment necessitating an eye patch, and a scruffy black beard. He was described in the text like this. Of course, like most pirates, he had a wooden peg for a leg, and so every now and then he would wobble and hobble as he walked. All in all, he didn't seem like a very fearsome pirate at all. Here, then, disability was constructed through a person supposed to be sinister and evil. However, this pirate could not even get this characterization right. Instead, he was located within the text more as a pitiable and pathetic person, an object of ridicule. This representation of disability reflects Birkeland and Bogdana's analysis of the general media's categorization of disability. To move the disability pirate metaphor further, although not along a plank, as we shall observe later that this is misrepresentation of the pirate culture writ large. Another of Birkeland and Bogdana's characterizations is aptly represented in Stevenson's classic portrayal of the pirates in Treasure Island. Here Stevenson portrays Long John Silver as being courageous despite his impairments. It seems that the image of the super crip is never very far away from us. Interestingly though, like disability, pirates too have had their reality inverted through the process of a bad press. Note, for example, this early piece of misrepresentation. Being possessed of a devil's fury, the pirate ripped open one of the prisoners with his cutlass, tore the living heart out of his body, gnawed at it, and then hurled it in the face of one of the others. Eckelman, The Buccaneers of America, 1678. Upon reading this quote, one feels you should shout in a West Country accent, "Shiver me timbers," and "Arr, Jim lad!" But this would be false, as this is the reflected language of Disneyfication. Yes, there is such a word, and not of piratology. Yes, there is such an area of study. Disability during this period was no more common amongst pirates than the general population. And interestingly, it is pirates who set up some of the first charities for disabilities. This picture then would seem to stand at some distance from the image of pirates reflected into the present day. In this electronic space, the history of Western culture and its relationships with impairment was revealed. It should be noted here that throughout history, impairments such as a hunchback, a hook, wooden leg, an eye patch have always been employed as a metaphor for evil and depravity in narratives children are inculcated into. In contrast, goodness is reflected throughout society by angel-like figures of long flowing, invariably blonde locks and smiling faces. Connor and Bajoran believe that such dichotomous images are nothing more than a form of disableism, which lead to the abnormalization of the cultural image of disabled people. Here then, the pilgrimage illuminates disability as a limited, controlled and conformed indigene. The limited construct of disability here, observed here, pulls focus on the cultural dominance of non-disabled people within society. As Gashi might say, the mirror's self-reflection is an embracing whole that allows itself into the other, which explains why it faces an object in the first place and why it returns reflexivity to itself. To try and draw some of these ideas together into some form of conclusion, I wish to try and shatter the mirror. In this ecclesia, then, neither morality nor religion, for me, had a single point of contact with reality. Knowledge, it seemed, had split into two forms. Here the mirror's reflecting image illuminated empirical knowledge, void of concepts, which revealed an understanding of priori conditions of knowledge, independent of what empirically existed. This knowledge, though, had nothing but imaginary causes, but in my mind it might have very real effects in defining societal conceptions of impairment. It was an intercourse between imaginary beings and imaginary natural science, and with the aid of the sign of religio-moral idiosyncrasy, repentance and the presence of this God, it became an imagined teleology revealing almost what Nietzsche would call nervous sympathicus. The heresies and research findings that I've detailed here today demonstrate that technology alone does not bring forth democracy. Rather, democracy, concepts of social justice and equality and inclusion, are allowed to be born, to die, and to be reborn by a general synod of the significant in society, which for time immemorial has always controlled and constrained the info flow. My argument, though, is we should not, in Agamben's term, flee from this God or potentiality of the possible, but rather we should adapt our heresies, our malevolent power in Spinoza's analysis, as weapons to reveal oppression. This new world, in Nietzsche's terms, requires a sanctification after the event. There is a need to bring forth a conferring power, to instill values, one which negates what has become natural in this new digital topography. By doing this, we must create a new set of values and morality and preach disobedience of this internet God. That is, of its priests, of the law bound up in its internet Bible and in its good news gospel messages. To paraphrase the words of the musician Johnny Cash, although hard, we must kick against the priests. We must, pilgrims, create sin. For it is only from this departure can there be a reconciliation with this God. Indeed, revelation and redemption of the nature of the past world is dependent upon such. The weaknesses inherent from the birth of this new God should be reformed as a God of love, of inclusiveness in the emplacement in this digital topos. This, to me, would disempower the lexicon of possibilities and potentiality. Salvation is within our grasp. But if we, as Barlow prophesied earlier, want this world to become more humane and fair, we all need to reach out and take it one keystroke at a time. I'd like to finish with a small piece of text from Nietzsche, if I may. All the concepts of this church have been recognized for what they are, the most malignant counterfeits that exist, the aim of which is to devalue nature and natural values. The priest himself has been recognized for what he is, the most dangerous kind of parasite, the real poison spider of life. We know today, our conscience knows, what these uncanny inventions of the priests and the church are really worth, what ends they served in reducing mankind to such a state of self-violation that its sight can arouse nausea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan, for that very rich presentation. We'd have, I think, a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes for questions, if somebody would like to ask one.
No, right
Okay.
there.
Alan, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your paper. I found it very stimulating, and you would expect me as the Director of the National Centre for Christian Education to pick up on some of those biblical references. And I very much appreciated the lens of using the language of the prophets and the false god in your work. I noticed that you used the opening passage of John and the idea of the word, and one of the things that struck me is that what the gospel writer's doing there is introducing a person, not written words on a page. And so I wanted to ask you whether there's something in that concept of personhood and relationship that is missing sometimes from the way that we think about and use technology, perhaps?
I think that's a really good question, Beth. Thank you so much. I'll hold my hands up. It's a willful corruption of many passages from the Bible. But it just seemed to be used there to sort of show how people have sort of accepted this teaching, this way as just unquestionable, as all-encompassing, all rest. And you're absolutely right. It is about relationships, and it is about people talking to each other, and it is about seeing the reality within our own world. I mean, one of the things that really interests me about the internet itself is this separation between ontology and narrative, between what we actually know goes on in our own environment and what we see on the web. And you know, week in and week out, we see all these stories of trolling and the internet being used in a form it was never intended to be. And I suppose, I've got to be careful, I don't call myself a prophet here, so I'm not going to, that we need to reach out and talk about that it is about inclusiveness, it is about relationships with people, it is about moving the reality that we see all around us of this love and inclusiveness onto the internet to show a more reasoned picture than that's there. I say my own naivety came from, I thought it would be better out there. I mean, I was completely naive. I thought that when we took the powerhouse of the publishing world out of it, this place would be a really good place. And actually, I feel quite pessimistic about the way it's going. And I think it's time that more of us did talk about relationships and how they should be involved within the internet. So, does that answer your question, sort of? I'm glad it does. Yes, David? That's all right.
Thanks again, Alan. This is fascinating, and I was really interested in some of the ideas that you had about around the way that this is almost an eschatological kind of resolution that's expected rather than a technical one. I mean, one of the things that you started out with the Davos Declaration that the states of the world have no means of enforcement. I was talking to a colleague recently who teaches computer games design at Stafford, who was saying that one of the first things that she does with her students is show them the cables under the Atlantic that actually carry the internet. You know, that a lot of people don't realize, because we have this kind of mythologized idea of cyberspace, we don't realize there are actually cables under the Atlantic and big warehouses in Ireland where all of the data kind of comes from when it comes across the Atlantic and back. And it's something that even legally has been under threat since the NSA. There's the safe harbor laws that allow that freedom, that transnational freedom to take place, have been under threat. The fact that people don't recognize that there's a physical, industrial, modernist foundation to the internet, I think is a real concern. Are there any solutions to this, or is this just going back to the prophetic analogy? Is this a Jeremiad? Is this the kind of pessimistic approach, or is there a solution to this?
I think that's an interesting question.
Cyberspace?
When you started talking about warehouses in Ireland, I always think of Bushmills, so I've got to get out of that feeling and think about big warehouses full of servers. It doesn't hold the same magic for me. I once asked a professor of the internet, well, of course, there must be a place where the internet actually exists, and he refused to accept that even in those servers that a place actually existed because of the scattering of knowledge and the way that people put a place together themselves. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. What I've been proposing fairly recently within my own area, which hasn't gone down remarkably well, in fact, lead balloons probably, yeah. Anyway, is this notion that as teachers and as people working in education, we've actually got to take on more control, more vetting of what we put on, more control of what children are using. And that sort of runs contrary to what the internet seemed to be, this anarchic structure where anybody could put on anything and go with whatever they want. But I actually think that we need to do more in schools to represent reality. The first thing you do when you want to take somebody's culture away is take away the stories. Beth talked about relationships. You take away a pupil's ability to see themselves within the text. That's how you control a populace. And that's what seems to be happening in parts of the internet, and stuff that I'm seeing in schools is that teachers who I thought would be really good at this aren't representing the realities. So my view is, yes, I'm incredibly pessimistic, but actually I think that we need to take more control. And that's a very dangerous message to sell in terms of this sort of global, libertarian, communicative technology. But I think a bit of it wouldn't go amiss. Ian.
Final question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. This is a really challenging set of ideas that you've thrown at us, and delightfully so. Now, I'm going to take it personally upon myself to ensure that you don't walk out of here depressed and beside yourself in terms of the impact of the positive sides of the internet. I was taken by your focus on democracy and the anti-democratic focus of a lot of the stuff that's clearly represented in the use that schools make of the internet. And the democratic side of things has always been of interest to me too. And if you look at Devaney, Gantz and Ma's book on technology and resistance, they have one case study after another, wonderful case studies of technology being used specifically in democratic movements around the world, in developing countries and so on, where cyberspace is actually designed to free up those without a voice. And it's extraordinary to have those ideas in the back of my mind and understand the reality that you're referring to in terms of the way that schools and a lot of us who ought to know better actually frame the use of the internet. So with that in mind, just simply a statement, it can be anti-democratic. It can be massively democratic and wonderfully freeing, and it takes one kid who can go beyond the strictures that are placed around the use of the internet in classroom to convince those who are doubters. There is some value in what we have here as a tool, and we just need to be smarter at using it.
I absolutely agree with the sentiment. I think I suppose that's one of the arguments within my speech is that we need to do more as educators to promote this. One of the things that really interests me is that a little village in East Germany, when East Germany was there, who had access to all the Western television, and the East Germans were really, really worried that this would bring forth democracy, and to try to set all these technological shields to stop it, but never could. It actually did completely the opposite, the technology of the day. It actually forced people back into sort of communism, thinking how good that was compared to what was over the fence. My worry is that the internet seems to be going in a certain way, that more and more people are standing back from it and saying, whoa, and I actually think we're going to lose something really major and a really big educational tool, but it needs more of us to stand up and to use it in a way that we can see it building relationships and actually working towards democratic ideals. So it's there to be taken one keystroke at a time. Thanks. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions. I will just say actually that Alan has contributed a chapter to the forthcoming CCDS book on changing social attitudes, which is on a similar theme, isn't it, Alan? So that's out later in the summer. Thank you very much, and could we just thank Alan?
Before you depart, I want to advertise our next Dangerous Ideas in Education. It's Professor John Sullivan.